I'm trying something new. I usually, heck, I guess always, pre-read and curate our tales for us, but this time we're reading cold from the book and see what happens. I'm hearing these for the first time myself. Actually, there was another time that Caledonia and I tried this with disastrous results from the Fantastic Alice series, and we conjured up a very naughty spider, which I shudder to even begin to think about reliving. Anyway, aside from that, I hope we'll do great tonight. But like the Gong Show, if we get started on a tale and we decide it's a no-go, we'll just move on to the next one. The book is Short and Shivery Tales. And our first, oh so very short story is: He woke up frightened and reached for the matches, and the matches were put in his hand. Okay, now that was a short story. But our next short story is just a wee bit longer. There were two fellows out working in the field, hoeing turnips they was, and the one he stopped and he leaned on his hoe and he mop his face and he say, "Yeah, I don't believe in your ghosties." The other man, he says, "I don't you now," and he vanished. Okay, that was a very short story too. Okay, on with the stories. But that's like the quintessential short story, like a karate chop story. Anyway, tonight we will meet flying cannibal heads, vengeful elves, and banshees, deadly forest spirits and goblins, and a curious creature that assembled itself out of bones and bits of other animals. I hope you enjoy meeting them and their ghastly friends. Judging by the way they're grinning and rubbing their bony hands or paws or claws together, I'd say they're eager, just dying to meet you. So, when hinges creak in doorless chambers, and strange and frightening sounds echo through the halls, whenever candle lights flicker where the air is deathly still, that is the time when ghosts are present, practicing their terror with ghoulish delight. When the crypt doors creak and the tombstones quake, the spooks come out for a swinging wake. When you hear the knell of a requiem bell, weird glows gleam where the spirits dwell. As the moon climbs high over the dead oak tree, the spooks arrive for the midnight spree. With a quiet shout, the lights go out. But do not fear, your storytellers are here to guide you through the gloom. And our first story is, what is it? Let's see. Appointment in Samara from Persia. Lights on. There. Among those who lived in Persia, many once believed death took the form of a tall woman hooded in black. I don't know that, Kira. But I'm free. I'm innocent because I don't know, because I haven't read anything. Ha ha. Kira voices some concern about animals, but I don't know. Anyway, among those who lived in Persia, many once believed death took the form of a tall woman hooded in black. In this guise, she could sometimes be seen wandering the bazaars of great cities. At first glance, she seemed to be only another shopper, but when she was recognized, she was shunned by mortals who fled in fear of her gaze or touch. One afternoon, Rakush, the servant of the wealthiest merchant in Baghdad, went early to market to purchase foods for a banquet for his master planned for the evening. But as he haggled with the seller over the price of pomegranates, he glanced up and was horrified to see the tall, reedy figure of Death herself, swathed in black, staring at him from a neighboring stall. When their eyes met, Death pointed her finger at him and started to speak. Dropping his basket of pomegranates and clapping his hands to his ears to avoid hearing the voice of Death, Rakush fled the market. Behind him, the stall-keeper scrambled to pick up the spilled fruit and called down ruin upon Rakush's head and his whole household. The vendor, however, did not notice the tall, hooded figure, who gazed thoughtfully after the fleeing man. Rakush did not stop running until he reached his master's house. And there, to the astonishment of the merchant, Rakush flung himself at his master's feet. "Oh, forgive me, master," pleaded Rakush. "This very morning I saw Death in the marketplace. She stared right at me and made a threatening gesture with her hand." Overcome with horror at the memory, the man shuddered and buried his pale face in his shaking hands. When he could speak again, he kissed the merchant's slippers. Oh, master, I beg you, loan me your fastest horse so that I may flee to far Samara, where my cousin lives. There I may escape the clutches of death. Mm. Well, of course, my servant, said the merchant, who was a kind-hearted man. Take my horse and go at once. I'll bring you safely to Samara and your cousin's house. Go, go. Rakush departed hastily, lashing his borrowed horse to breakneck speed. Meanwhile, the merchant went to the bazaar to see whether Death would appear, and to pray her not to be angry that his servant had escaped his fate. Shortly after entering the marketplace, the merchant spotted Death, hooded in black. She idled among the stands, examining the wares on the display. From time to time, she would tap a man or a woman on the shoulder as if to ask the quality of goods. But each person she tapped would stifle a cry of fear and hurry away. Nevertheless, the merchant was a righteous man who had confidence in the mercy of Allah, so much so that Death herself did not daunt him. So he beckoned the tall, black-cowled figure to him, and she came willingly enough. Yes, Miss Death, is it? I am curious as to why you threatened my servant, he asked. Oh, I never threatened him, answered Death with just a hint of a smile. I simply made a gesture of surprise at seeing him here in Baghdad. You see, I have an appointment with him tonight in Samara. And with a chuckle, Death disappeared. Well, I think it was a fun little story from Persia. It was a little bit longer than our other short story, wasn't it? Okay, so we're just going from the beginning to the end. So the next one up is Dear Woman. No, not Dear Woman. Dear Woman. I was going to try to make a noise like a deer, but I don't know what noise deers make. Anyway. Long ago, the Ponca people lived in what is now Nebraska. They dwelt in mat houses, cooked their meat in clay pots, and carved their weapons from stone and wood. But during a time of peace and plenty, the tribe was troubled by a fearful spirit called the Deer Woman. One night, there was a big dance to celebrate a successful buffalo hunt. The old men built a big fire, and the young women danced around it, stepping sidewise in a ring. The young men danced apart, leaping and prancing in the space between the bonfire and the circling women. One young man, Greyhawk, paused and looked up. And there between two young women he knew, holding their hands, was a stranger. Now this stranger was the most beautiful woman Greyhawk had ever seen. Her hair flowed like a black waterfall over her white buckskin dress. Though it was impolite, he stared into her enchanting deep black eyes. While everyone around him danced and laughed and sang, he could only gaze into the lovely face of the young woman. At last the woman stretched out her hand and drew him aside. Her eyes never left his. He was captured, and the thought pleased him. As the moon sank to its lowest point, she led him away into the shadows beyond the firelight circle of the dancers. Now Greyhawk had a younger brother, Many Arrows, who watched what was happening. He felt uneasy, wondering who this woman was who had charmed his elder brother. When Greyhawk left with the young woman, Many Arrows hesitated, then decided to follow them. And to his horror, he found Greyhawk trampled to death, his body slashed and scarred by knife-edged hooves. The tracks of a huge deer were clearly imprinted in the earth. Many Arrows saw no moccasin prints except his brother's. What had become of the young woman? Many Arrows carried his brother's broken body back to the Ponca camp, raising a great cry. There, the oldest woman in the village told Many Arrows that his brother had been lured away and destroyed by Deer Woman. She told the grieving young man there was nothing he could do to prevent the creatures coming and going among them. There was a great power in that demon woman. Anyone who gazed into her eyes saw just her loveliness and would be bewitched. Only if one could keep his eyes cast down would he see that her feet were actually deer's hooves, which no moccasins would fit. But Many Arrows vowed revenge for his brother's death. Before the next gathering, a 7-foot wall of brush and logs was built around the dance ring at his request. When the dancing began and all the people of the village were inside the circle, some men sealed the entrance with a gate of branches. The fire was lit. The women began dancing around the inside of the ring's wall. Many Arrows had made the other men of the village promise not to look up at the women's faces, but to keep their eyes on the dancers' feet so they could watch for the telltale hooves and not fall under Deer Woman's spell. But as the dance went on, The young men could not resist looking at the pretty women dancing around them. Soon only many arrows refused to look up, and so it was that he saw in the shuffling line of moccasins the sudden appearance of a pair of huge deer hooves. With a cry, Many Arrows threw himself at Deer Woman and grabbed for her. What had seemed to be a lovely woman suddenly became a huge deer wearing the shreds of a woman's skirt. The young man tried to wrestle the creature to the ground, but she slashed at him with her knife-sharp hooves. Then, with an unearthly cry, the demoness leapt over the 7-foot wall. By the time the young man and his fellows wrenched open the gate and followed with drawn bows, the ghostly creature was bounding away across the moonlit grassland, beyond the reach of any arrow. Though they tried tracking the creature in the morning, the trail soon vanished. After this, the dancers were always on the watch for Deer Woman, but she never returned. From time to time, though, stories reached the Ponca people about a young man in some other village who had lost his life to the fearsome spirit. Oh. All right. Well, this one's called the maggot. Maybe that's an animal we don't care if it dies. Well, see what happens. British Isles. Like I say, I'm hearing these for the first time myself. In Yorkshire, years ago, a loathsome creature haunted the churchyard of a little village. The first person to see it was the postman, Ian Thwaite. One moonlit night, he passed the graveyard on his way home. Through the gate, he saw a large blob of glowing ooze rising from the grave of a recently dead villager. Well, this might be pretty good after all. A horrible, wriggling mix of maggot and glowworm, it grew bigger and bigger as it emerged. The thing's eyes gave off a blaze of pure evil, yet they struck Ian as disturbingly human somehow, too. The thing twisted snake-like around the tombstones, finally pushing out through the gate pickets, while Ian watched from behind a nearby bush. Horrified, yet fascinated, Ian followed the huge maggot at a safe distance. The road was empty as the ghastly apparition moved along like a caterpillar, leaving a trail of gleaming slime. This lingered briefly and then faded without a trace. Ian was careful not to step at any part of the road touched by the sickening stuff. The monstrosity's destination proved to be the nearby home of the vicar. It's always the vicar, isn't it? As Ian watched, shivering from revulsion as much as from the night air, the thing oozed across the threshold of the vicar's cottage. Then the glowing worm began to push beneath the front door. In a trice, it vanished inside. Now, Ian, the postman, felt dizzy, overwrought by what he had seen. He sat down suddenly, the starry sky spun over his head, and he blacked out for a moment. But when he came to, the vicar's cottage was quiet. Now, surely if the postman had seen what he thought he had seen, the house would have been in an uproar. Deciding that he had had an awful waking dream of some sort, Ian hurried home to his bed. But his sleep was plagued with nightmares of being pursued by wormy things burning bright as coals. Boy, I know that dream. At dinner the next day, he and his wife, Edna, were joined by a friend, William West. The others asked Ian why he seemed so nervous and preoccupied. When Ian told them his experience, he expected them to laugh at him. But they believed he might have witnessed some supernatural event. Both suggested that they all go to the churchyard and watch and see if the apparition would appear again. They waited until dark, and then leaving Ian and Edna's 5-year-old son in care of the housekeeper, the 3 adults took up watch outside the churchyard. And though he felt better having others with him, Ian was not eager to face that nightmare again. Just as before, the glowing maggot extruded itself from the new grave, retraced its course to the vicar's cottage, and squeezed through the gap under the door. This time, however, Edna did not hesitate to rap loudly on the door. The vicar himself, looking tired and cross, opened the door when he found it was not a parishioner needing his services, but a group of excited neighbors with a story of a giant glowing worm. He grew, shall we say, quite annoyed. He assured the 3 that he had walked the length of the house to answer the door, and that nothing was amiss, and he obviously thought they had all gone quite mad. When he closed the door, the sound was loud and emphatic. Talking softly, husband and wife returned home, while William went his own way. Now, Ian and Edna were having a tea the next day, when William charged up the path and pounded on the door. As soon as they let him in, he breathlessly told them that the vicar and his family had been taken ill the night before, and all had died by noon. Those maggots. The doctor said the deaths were from food poisoning, probably from some tainted fish they'd eaten. Yes, but I suspect a very different cause, as I expect you do too, said Ian grimly. His wife and friend nodded in agreement. More determined than ever to get to the bottom of this haunting, the three again took up watch out the churchyard that night. Once more the disgusting, glowing maggot wriggled up from the earth and slithered out of the cemetery. They followed the trail of fading slime to the house of the blacksmith, but their attempt to warn the man was turned away with laughter and accusation that they were all daft. This time one visit from the maggot was enough. The blacksmith became ill in the morning and was dead before day's end. Again the doctor called it food poisoning, and he warned people to be more careful preparing meals. Who else thinks the doctor's in on this? Increasingly worried, Ian and his companions stood guard a third night. Sure enough, the horror rose from the grave. This time they realized too late that it was headed for Ian and Edna's house. They broke into a run as the thing reached their porch and flowed under the door. The three burst into the house. Frantically, they searched every room, every cupboard, every chest, but not a trace of the filthy, disgusting thing could they find. All the while, the housekeeper tried to hush their 5-year-old son, who was upset by the commotion. Ian and William decided to keep watch through the night. Edna took the child into her bed and kept her own uneasy watch. Despite their efforts, the boy was stricken with a fever in the morning. The doctor came at once, but nothing he did helped. The child grew worse. When the doctor spoke vaguely of food poisoning, the others pointed out that they had eaten the same food and they were fine. The priest was summoned in the hope that prayer might achieve what medicine could not. But alas, there was no remedy, and the child died at noon. For Ian and Edna and William, grief was mixed with a desire for revenge. So that night they marched back to the churchyard carrying a hooded lantern and shovels. There they dug into the grave that housed that maggot. The grave belonged to Malcolm Sharp, a wretched man who had made life miserable for his neighbors, often threatening one or another with harm for some imagined offense. He had taken particular dislike to the vicar and the blacksmith. When they unearthed the coffin, Ian and William pried the lid while Edna held the lantern. Inside, they found the body cold but uncorrupted. Sharp's open eyes burned with a look of intense evil. From between the corpse's grinning lips, a liquid brightness began to seep. In terror, Ian slammed the lid back down. The men scrambled out of the hole and doused the coffin with kerosene. When it burned to cinders, Edna sprinkled it with holy water she had taken from the church. Then they filled in the grave and kept an uneventful watch until dawn. That hideous specter was never seen after this. Ian and Edna mourned their son, and always regretted that their efforts to stop evil had brought such sorrow. But they took comfort in knowing they had kept the maggot from harming any other villagers. And so that's a reportedly true story from the British Isles. Yeah, I don't think I like maggots. I don't have a lot of use for maggots, especially giant maggots. Maggots. All right. Next one is Witchy Woman. Now that's a song. Witchy Woman. A witch woman. They say this is an African-American traditional. Oh, that sounds like fun. Late one night, a traveler down south lost his way in a dreary swamp. He was exhausted and desperate for shelter and faint with hunger when he spotted a lonely cabin. Encouraged by the light in the cabin's single window, he rapped at the door. The old woman answered. Though her skin was wrinkled, it had a sheen of hand-rubbed leather. Her eyes were soft and shone in the light of the candle she held. For all her years, she moved with the easy grace of a cat. We like cats, don't we? Hat in hand, the man politely said, If I could just get me a hunk of corn pone and a slice of bacon, maybe a place to bed down, I'd be willing to pay anything. Anything? Asked the woman with a curious smile. Oh, truth be, ma'am, I got but a few pennies, said the traveller. But you're welcome to 'em if you can spare me even a crust of bread. Her smile grew bigger. I don't want your coins, but I can give you better than a crust of bread, my friend, and you'll have a place to sleep. Come in, come in. In the morning you can do some chores for me. The hungry man's mouth began to water as he saw a well-filled skillet cooking over the hot coals in the fireplace. The smell of frying ham made his stomach growl. The woman sat him at a table, then she gave him a plate heaped with meat and greens and cornbread. It tasted so good that he ate until he felt fit to burst. After all the food, the man was ready to sleep. He reminded her that she had promised him a bed for the night. You can sleep in the woodshed, but mind that you don't bother me until morning. I'm an old woman, I need my rest. At this she smiled the biggest smile ever. The man gratefully took a bit of blanket she gave him and made himself a bed in the woodshed. But once he had bedded down, he found he couldn't sleep. A night wind circled the shed restlessly. The cries of an owl, who said that, and chirrings and scratchings under the floorboards disturbed the man. Across the yard he saw the old woman's window blazing brightly. If she was still awake, he decided he would go and talk with her. The night was spooking him just that much. To be sure that she wasn't asleep, though, he peeked into the window first. To his surprise, he saw the woman doing a juba dance in the middle of the floor. She stopped and took a big gridiron down from the wall and raked it full of hot coals from the fireplace. And then she hauled her spinning wheel over and sat down on the gridiron. Soon her skin seemed to glow as red hot as the coals. Suddenly, the woman pinched a bit of her chin's skin between her fingers and drew it away, thread-like, to the spinning wheel, and began to spin the skin right off of her body. Over and over she sang, "Spin and turn, burn, coal burn, turn and spin, come off skin." In horror, the man watched her spin all the skin right off of her body. As the skin threads pulled away, they revealed an enormous, tawny yellow cat underneath. The creature pushed the heap of unraveled skin under the bed, saying, "Lie there, skin. I've got business to tend to. Tomorrow, when that fellow has done his chores, I'll have him for supper." "Hello, Brayla. Welcome." Cackling, she leapt from the window. While the man hid, then the cat was bounded in the forest as fast as a panther. With the creature out in the swamp, the man didn't dare run off, yet it would be worse when she returned. At first, he thought his situation was hopeless, but then he had an idea. Slipping into the cabin, he dragged the skin from under the bed, then he poured pepper and salt into the witch woman's skin. Finally, he put the skin back under the bed. Shaking with nervousness, he went back to the woodshed. Hours passed as he waited, trembling. At last he heard heavy paws pad toward the cabin. Then there was silence. He held his breath, peeking through a knothole. Well, if it's a knothole, what is it? Suddenly, terrible screams and moans erupted from inside the cabin. The witch stumbled into the yard, trying to pull off her old woman's skin. "You did this! You did this!" she bellowed, pointing her finger at the woodshed. Still tugging at her own skin, she lunged across the yard. As she did, she began to change into something that was half cat, half woman. "Thunk!" She flung herself at the cabin door. Thump! Thump! For another minute, he held the door shut. Then the creature's weight splintered the old wood. Cat's paws at the end of human arms snatched at him, but he skedaddled backward up the pile of sawn logs behind him. The stacked wood collapsed and rolled toward the snarling cat woman. She stumbled and fell just long enough for him to get out the door. She didn't follow. He crept back close enough to see that the salt and pepper had vexed her, so that all she could think of was pulling off her old skin. And she didn't notice that the sun beginning to rise. The man turned to run when the cat's shape, free of the salted skin, leaped into the yard. But that witchy thing was meant only for night. When the sunlight touched the creature's fur, it gave a terrifying yowl and fell down dead. Without another look, the traveler fled into the lightning forest. Yeah. No, it wasn't a cat that died. It was a witch. So I don't take a ding for that one. Not really an animal, right? Okay. Welcome, Brayla. And all at Tal. So, Mags. Is that Mags? Looks like Mags. Hi. Our next one's is from the Philippines, and it's called Burbalangs. Okay. This sounds like fun. Over a century ago, Andrew Simmons, a British traveler, visited the little island of Cagayan Sulu, a lonely spot of land in the Sulu Sea between the Philippine Islands and Malaysia. Oh, I know just the place. Simmons was intrigued by strange tales of a village at the center of the island inhabited by Burbalangs, who only looked human. It was said that they were cannibals who had cat's eyes. When the hunger for human flesh drove them, they would lie down in the tall grass, then they would fall into a trance and send their winged spirits hunting for victims. A quick glance over at Talus, while their bodies stayed hidden in the grass. The people of Kagayan Sulu lived in fear of their unearthly neighbors. They warned Simmons that Burbalang hunters made a moaning noise, which was loud at a distance but died away to near silence as they approached the prey. Oh, that's great. You can hear them when they're a long ways away, but they're quiet when they get up close. That's like those female mosquitoes. Where's the male mosquitoes? One makes a noise, the other one eats you. I can't remember. Anyway, when they were very close, the sound of their wings would be heard, and their flashing eyes would dance like fireflies in the dark. Oh, great. So once they're right upon you, then you can hear their wings and their glowing eyes. I suspect it might be too late then. Anyway, enough editorializing. Simmons was told that a coconut pearl, a stone like an opal, sometimes found in a coconut. Holy mac, I found one of those once. Huh. A coconut pearl would keep him safe. Without one, the only defense was a crease, a knife, that it had its blade rubbed with lime juice. Simmons offered to buy a coconut pearl, but he learned the pearl only protects the one who finds it, losing its power if given away or sold. We learn something every day. Determined to find the truth behind the frightening stories, Simmons vowed to visit the ghoulish tribe of Burbalangs. At first, he could get no one to guide him. Finally, one brave young man, Matali, agreed to accompany him. They set out the next morning from the seaside village. After a difficult trek, they sighted their destination late in the afternoon. Simmons wanted to push on, but Matali refused to go closer than half a mile. You've seen the place, he said to the Englishman. Let us go. I haven't come this far to stop now, Simmons replied. Matali shrugged, making clear he would go no farther. But the young Filipino smeared his knife with lime juice and handed it to his companion. Thus armed, Simmons entered the village alone. The 24 or so huts seemed unremarkable, but except for a few chickens and a goat, no living thing could be seen. The Englishman entered several huts, but found them deserted. In one, some rice was standing in a pot, still quite hot, as if the occupants had left just seconds before their meal. When Simmons told Matali about the deserted village, the young man begged the older one to hurry away with him, saying that the empty huts meant the Burbalangs were out hunting in their winged form. Another glance at Talus. It was dangerous to be anywhere near. The sun was setting, so the two began their hasty journey home. Before they covered half the distance, it grew dark. Not a breath of air stirred. The woods were unnaturally silent. They had just started across a treeless valley when they heard loud moaning. Matali immediately crouched down in the long grass and signaled Simmons to hide. The Burbalangs, hide! Pray they pass without seeing us. Though the Englishman was doubtful, Matali's fear was real enough, so Simmons knelt down also. The moaning grew fainter. Matali whispered the hunters were coming closer. Suddenly the sound died away to a faint hum, and the sound of wings could be clearly heard. A swarm of dancing lights, like fireflies, only reddish, swept over the tall grasses. Simmons gasped as Matali gripped his arm painfully. When the lights halted and began to circle as if attracted to something in the tall grass, Simmons felt the hair on his head begin to rise. Then the lights passed on, the noise of the wings ceased, and the moaning grew louder. Hey, they have gone, Matali said. We are safe for a while. Staying in the shadows, alert for flickering red lights, they raced towards Matali's village. Once they saw the lights of an isolated house, far from the path. To their horror, they heard moaning, loud at first but growing fainter. Above the roof swirled countless red specks like chimney sparks. We must help those people, said Simmons. No. Hassan, who owns that house, has a coconut pearl to protect him, said Matali. Hurry, this is our chance to escape. Come. So Simmons, believing Matali, hurried on. In the morning, Simmons chided himself for having been fool enough to let Matali's fear and swarming fireflies scare him. When Simmons asked about the man Hassan, Matali confessed that he had lied about Hassan having a coconut pearl. Hassan had arrived only recently. He was a scholar who was studying the history and culture of the island, and he laughed off stories about the Burbalangs as much as Simmons himself. Sounds like a man after my own heart, said Simmons. I'll pay him a visit. He's sure to have some interesting views on this. When the Englishman reached Hassan's house, no one answered his knock, but the latch gave way and the door swung open. Calling Hassan's name, Simmons entered the house. The shades of split bamboo were rolled down, so the place was in deep shadow. He could make out a desk littered with books and papers. Suddenly he backed away with a gasp. Huddled on the corner bed was Hassan's body. Only a few scraps of flesh still clung to his bony fingers, clutching the shredded sheet. Simmons stumbled to the door, then froze. Over the rippling grass, through veils of shimmering heat, came the sound of moans, growing steadily fainter. Barbalangs. Oh, hey, now we're going to Ireland. Here we go. Of course you are, Tallis, darling. I say that out of fear more than anything. The Dancing Dead of Shark Island. Just off the coast of Ireland lies the island that the locals call Shark Island, though its proper name is Inishark. One November night, Kathleen O'Connor. I remember her. Wasn't she in that movie with John Wayne? No, not that Kathleen. She was a bit player in the back. Anyway, Kathleen O'Connor, young woman, trudged wearily along the road. She'd been visiting a sickly relative, was now heading home. But the road was steep and rocky. She grew so tired that she sat down to rest. She shivered with more than the chill night air, for it was now the dread time the islanders called the Hour of the Dead. Kathleen drew her shawl around her and closed her eyes for just a moment. Then the sound of crunching gravel woke her. Instantly she opened her eyes and pressed her hand to her mouth to stop a startled cry. A pale young man was approaching Kathleen, and though she could have sworn that the moonlit road had stretched empty before her when she had paused to rest only moments earlier. "Oh, don't be afraid," he said. His voice was gentle, his face was kind, though he seemed very sad. "Indeed," said Kathleen, "there is something familiar about you." "Look well at me," he answered, coming a step closer. "Now do you know me?" "Yes, I know you now," she said, her voice dying away to a frightened whisper. "Why, you're young Brian, who was drowned last year when out fishing. Why are you here?" "Well, look," he said, pointing to the side of the nearby hill. "That is why I have come." Kathleen looked and saw a great company dancing to the sweet music of unseen pipes and drums. So graceful were their movements they seemed to step and bow and spin as daintily as butterflies darting over blossoms. The sight chilled her to the bone, for among those who danced so beautifully, Kathleen recognized all the people who had died on the island for as long as she could remember. Men, women, and children were clothed in white. Their faces were as pale as bone in the moonlight. So intent were they on the fairy music they did not seem to notice the young woman who watched their revels in fascination and fright. But when the music stopped, all the ghastly faces turned towards Kathleen. They raised bone white hands, beckoning her to join them. They drifted toward her, stretching out their fingers as though they would take hold of her and drag her into the hillside. "Run for your life," warned Brian's ghost. "If they bring you into the dance, you'll never leave this company again." Terrified for her soul, Kathleen turned to flee. But at that moment the hidden musicians again began to play. The unearthly music froze the unfortunate young woman where she stood trembling, as the smiling dancers gathered around her in a circle. Brian, himself a thrall to the music, joined his hands with those of the other dancers. Around and around Kathleen they danced, the fairy musicians playing madly. The ghosts spun faster and faster until they became a blur of whirling white in which she could no longer make out faces and forms. Faster and still faster they swept around Kathleen. It made her dizzy to watch. The drums and pipes filled her ears and head with a frenzied throbbing. Her senses began to swirl. She grew faint. All at once she fell to the ground unconscious. Kathleen knew no more till she woke up the next morning in her own bed. Her brother Kevin, anxious when she did not return, had gone out searching for her, found her in a faint, and brought her home. Ah, good old Kevin. But there was a weakness and a forgetfulness now in Kathleen, so she could not tell what had happened. The Arab doctor was sent for, and he tried every measure he could to save her. But in the end he shook his head and whispered to Kevin, "Oi, lad, she's got the fairy stroke. Nothing can heal the fairy stroke. My lad, I'm sorry." So Kevin kept watch of and prayed over Kathleen's bed, but she grew weaker. And just as the moon rose that night, she turned her head a bit, as though listening, and said, "Do you not hear it?" And then the entire world crashed, and all the computers shut down, and I couldn't see anybody. And then, anxiously, her brother listened, and sure enough, now he could hear the soft music, infinitely sweet, unbearably sad all around the house. It's always scarier when the power goes out, don't you think? Yeah, exactly. And when he stepped to the window to see who the musicians were, he saw nothing but the moonlit meadow behind the house. The music stopped. There was a sigh from the bed, then silence. When he returned to Kathleen's bedside, Kevin found that she was dead. Outside, the ghostly musicians struck up a mocking, lively tune. Mad with grief, Kevin flung himself at the door. In the distance, for an instant, he saw Kathleen dancing away from their cottage toward the moon-bright hills. She paused briefly to wave her pale hand at him, and then she faded from his view as the music died away into silence and a green flash. Okay, then. Top that. Yes, ma'am. Who else joined us? Somebody did. Is it Dex? Hi, Dex. Okay, we weathered our way through that. Perhaps the ghosts will not interrupt our tour further. Friendly spooks have interrupted our tour. Please remain seated in your doom buggy. Okay, this one is from Scotland. That I see, but this I sow. In the Scottish town of Beauty. In the Scottish town of Bewley, there was once a tailor, Sandy, who worked very hard. But Sandy could not manage to put enough coins aside to get married. It happened that the girl he loved, Flossie, actually the story says Flora, the girl that Sandy loved by the name of Flora was also desired by Angus, who was a well-to-do farmer. I'd stay with Flossie, but having not knowing where this story is going, I feel that could be dangerous. So we'll just stay with Flora. Now, it turns out that Flora wanted no part of Angus or his promises of riches and a grand house. Instead, Flora loved Sandy, and that was that. She'd wait until he had put enough by for them to wed, and she put aside what she earned as lady's maid so she could marry her dearie all the sooner. Now, there was the shell of a church nearby. During a feud between two powerful clans had been set on fire by the MacDonalds, you know how they are, when it had been full of Mackenzies, you know how they were. And not a single Mackenzie had escaped. Since that time, the church itself was said to be haunted, and no one would go near it after sunset. Now there's some tales we should explore. One day, Angus went to Sandy's tailor shop on the pretense of having a shirt mended. As Sandy plied his needle, the two men chatted, and Angus brought the talk around to Sandy's lack of money to wed Flora. So tell me, that's what will you be doing? What will you be willing to do to get the money? Asked clever Angus. Why, anything, answered Sandy. I will then, said Angus slyly. Tell you what I'll do. I'll give you what you need. If you'll spend as much of the night alone in the old church as it takes to sew me a new pair of trousers, eh? Now Sandy, being a clever tailor, knew all the stories about the ruined church being haunted by strange creatures. But his love for Flora was so strong that he agreed on the spot when Angus proposed. Aye, then, said Angus, settle yourself in the church on the stroke of midnight, And when you've made me trousers, you can bring them to my door, and I'll pay you for your sewing and your courage. Now Angus sounded cheerful enough, but he secretly hoped that something terrible would happen to the tailor so that he'd be rid of his rival for fair Flora's heart. Shortly before midnight, the brave tailor arrived at the church. First, he tested the door to make sure that it would close. Then he pried loose the latch on the inside of the door, leaving the outside latch as it was. This way, the door could be drawn shut from the outside, but not pulled open again from the inside, you see. He left the door ajar. That sounds dangerous to me, but all right, we'll go with that. Inside, the fire-blackened stone walls of the church were pierced with tall, narrow windows barely wide enough for a man's fist to fit through. Moonlight shone down through a hole where the center of the roof had fallen in, but it gave scant light. The brave little tailor settled himself in one of the pews near the door. The little tallow candle began to sew. The wavering flame sent shadows dancing all around him. At first all was quiet, and then as the stroke of midnight tolled, the tailor gasped. Leaning toward him out of the darkness was a great fleshless skull with gritting jaws and sockets without eyes. In a horrible hoarse voice the bony jaws rasped, "Seest thou big grey skull, O tailor?" "That I see, but this I sew," replied the terrified little man as he bravely went on sewing. "Seest thou this long grizzled throat without food, O tailor?" demanded the thing as more of its ghastly self appeared. "That I see, but this I sew," answered the tailor. Indeed, he was now sewing frantically along. "Seest thou this long grizzled trunk without food, O tailor?" questioned the skull. It was drawing nearer, and Sandy could see more of the terrible shape now. "That I see, but this I sew," said the tailor as well as he could through his chattering teeth. "Seest thou this long grizzled thigh without food, O tailor?" said the haunter, stepping fully into the candlelight now. "That I see, but this I sew," said Sandy. Indeed, he needed only 3 or 4 more stitches to complete the trousers, but the skeletal thing was now towering above poor Sandy. The moonlight through the ruined roof made its bones shine so brightly that Sandy could not look at it directly. The tailor's hands were shaking, so he feared he could not finish his work. "Seest thou this long grizzled arm without food, O tailor?" growled the creature of bone and light. He raised his massive dead hand skyward with a loud rattle. With trembling hands the sailor took his last stitch and bit off the end of his thread. At that instant the thing stretched out its bony hand to seize Sandy. Through its fleshless jaws it bellowed, "Seest thou this great grizzled paw without food, O tailor?" But Sandy, gripping the newly made trouser in his hand, sprang to his feet and raced for the door of the church. Before he got through, the skeleton fingers caught at his leg, the nails raking the back of it painfully. And then Sandy was outside and pulled the door closed behind him. As he leaned against the sealed portal, he heard the fumblings of the thing as, unable to find the missing latch, it began to scrape and scratch at the wood. But the tailor was already racing for Angus's home. Sandy presented himself to Angus, demanding payment for their wager. But Angus denied that Sandy had gone to the church. When Sandy showed the scratches on his leg, Angus claimed he had scraped himself with briars. They exchanged heated words. Finally, a group of townsfolk, hearing the tailor's story and Angus's challenge, went to investigate the church. There they found the deep scratches and dents that splintered the wood on the inside of the door that could only have been made by the haunter Sandy had described. And so Angus was made to pay the brave little tailor what he had promised and was given the trousers that cost him so dearly. And then Sandy and Flora were married and lived happily ever after. But at the end of his days, Sandy bore faint scars across the back of one leg, where the bony fingers of the thing had scraped his flesh. Hello, Cinnamon. Guess I should turn the microphone back on. I wonder when I turned that off. Did you guys hear the end of the story? I hope so. Hello, Sin. If you didn't hear that, what story? Rick, I do adore you. All the way to his flesh. Good. Okay, so our next story is... See, sometimes I probably should pre-read these because I'm not even sure how to say this. So this is from the West Indies, Martinique to be precise. La Goublesse. Not oubliette. La Goublesse. La Goublet. Anybody help me out with this one? G-U-S. We'll type that. So I get for not reading ahead, but I thought it'd be fun to do them cold and see what happened. So, La Goublesse is the name of this story. For from West Indies. It was a breezeless, cloudless noon, the hour of rest. In the day's dazzling light, the hills seemed like blue smoke. Nothing stirred in the fields of the ripening cane or in the mysterious vine-veiled woods beyond. The palms along the road held their heads still as if listening and waiting for something. 2 young workers, Gabu and Fafa, were taking break from their labors in the cane fields. They sat beside the road, fanning themselves with their wide straw hats. Lugubrious. I will go with that. As they watched, a woman came along the road which it led past them over the mountains. She was young and very tall, with a skin the color of polished ebony. She wore a high white turban, alabaster robe, and a white scarf draped across her shoulders. Her bare feet carried her swiftly and noiselessly. Gabu was startled. He was sure she had appeared on the very stretchy, empty road he had just been staring along. How could anyone have appeared so suddenly, he wondered. But his friend Fafa just grinned and nudged him. Gabu answered with a smile. Neither had seen the woman before, but they both felt they could watch her forever. She moved with the grace of a dancer. The lovely woman approached the 2 men who stood and greeted her. Bonjour, mademoiselle. Bonjour, monsieur, she responded. She hardly glanced at Gabu, but she turned large, dark eyes upon Fafa. When she smiled at him, he felt wrapped in a blaze of black lightning. She makes me afraid, whispered Gabu. Something in her look troubled him, though he could not say what it was. Well, she does not make me afraid, said Fafa, boldly put his on his hat, followed the gently swaying figure. Ignoring Gabu, who warned, Fafa, have a care. But Fafa did not heed. The strange woman slowed her pace, waiting for him. In a moment he was at her side. They climbed the mountain road together. Where are you going? Asked Fafa. As far as the river of the Lizard, she answered. But that's more than 30 kilometers, he cried. And what of that? She said, gazing at him. Do you want to come with me or no? There was such a longing in her eyes he could not resist. He heard the clang of the plantation bell calling him back to work. Far behind him, he saw a white and black speck of the sun. It was Gabu. For a moment he became confused. How would they walk so far in such a short time? He thought of the overseer's anger, of the distance. Then he looked again in the woman's dark eyes and said, Oui, I will go with you. Then they both laughed like naughty little children. She walked on with Fafa striding beside her. What is your name? Asked Fafa. You must guess for yourself, my sweet. Fafa disliked riddles, but he asked, Is it Cendrine? No, that is not it. Is it Vitaline? She shook her head. All of his guesses, Aza, Nini, Moyo, Lalu, were wrong. Tiring of the game, she quickened her pace, began to sing. Listen to this song of mine. I've traveled a long, long time. Love was gone, now it draws near. Will you be my love, my dear? Fafa had to walk faster to keep up. His thin cotton shirt grew soaked with sweat. He panted, yet his companion's skin stayed dry. Her easy steps and gentle breathing gave no hint of her effort. At last she stopped and waited for him, still singing. Fafa fanned himself with his hat. Perhaps I should return, he said. The smile left her face, then replaced by a look of sadness. Oh, stay beside me. I will walk more slowly for you. Again Fafa was caught in the black lightning of her gaze. As they continued, she moved at a gentler pace, became more friendly. The 2 talked loudly, laughed, sang together even. They left the valley behind, climbing the steep road across the eastern peaks, through woods choked with creepers. As sunset approached, the sky deepened from lemon to orange above the distant lilac sea. All at once the woman left the road to take a narrow path leading up through the woods on their left. Fafa hesitated to follow, for the orange sun was rapidly sinking. Hurry now, hurry, she called. This is the shortest way. Hurry. He obeyed, taking the path that zigzagged into the shadows. Ahead he could just glimpse her white turban and her white scarf. Then the vines and boughs closed around him. The shadows of night mixed with the forest gloom. Huge fireflies sparkled like wind-tossed coals in the dark, and he could not see her at all. Where are you? He called out, afraid. Here, give me your hand, she whispered. The hand that guided Fafa through the shadows was cold. The woman walked with the shoulders of one who knew the path by heart. Suddenly they broke from the forest onto a ledge. From the ravine below their feet rose the sound of rushing waters. Her face was in shadow as she stood looking at the sky dotted with the first stars. "Do you love me, Fafa?" she murmured, her voice nearly drowned out by the sound of the hurrying stream. Oui, you have my heart, my soul." She suddenly turned to him in the faint last red light of the sunset, revealing the horror of her true face. She laughed hideously and taunted him. "Well, kiss me now." In that moment, he knew her name, La Goubliesse, the goblin who haunted the sunlit mountain roads and who vanished by night. She took a step toward him. His brain reeled at the awfulness of what he saw. He stepped backward and, falling, poor Fafa crashed to his death in the mountain torrent far below. Oh, those darn sexy goblins. Fake goblin. Actually, this was a real goblin, wasn't it? All right, where are we going now? Oh, we're going back to Ireland. Oh, my own County Cork. This should be fun. The blood-drawing ghost of Ireland. Hope you're enjoying it, guys. It's kind of fun doing these short little stories. It's just a little exciting because I don't know what's going to come next. I'm going to do something weird. But anyway, the blood-drawing ghost. There was once a young man, John, in Ireland's County Cork, who was courting 3 girls at one time. Ah, John. He didn't know whether to make Mary or Peggy or Kate his wife. They all had sweet names, sure enough, and each was as pleasing to his eye as the other. His family was after him to choose one and marry and get it over with. But John could not make up his mind. Now the churchyard in town was said to be haunted. Oh, good. No one would go there after dark. As John walked past it one afternoon, he had a sudden thought. Pushing open the rusty gates, he went to the big tomb at the center. There he placed his blackthorn walking stick on the lintel above the sealed doors. That evening there was a gathering at a neighbor's house. As he expected, John found Mary and Peggy and Kate there. Kate asked right away, "Where's your blackthorn, John? Have you lost it?" "No, I did not," said John. "I'd left it atop the tomb at the center of the churchyard, and whichever one of you 3 will bring it to me this very moment, that's the woman I'll marry, right enough." He turned to his first sweetheart and asked, "Well, Mary, will you go for my stick or not?" "Faith, I will not," said Mary. "Oh. Well, Peggy, will you go?" he asked his second love. "Oh, though it means losing you," said Peggy, "I'll not go." "Well, then, Kate," he said to the third, "will you fetch me blackthorn? If you do, you're the one I'll marry." "Sure, I'll bring it to ye," Kate said stoutly, and off she went. Now, the graveyard was 3 miles away, but Kate was a brawny girl with a fast stride, so she came to the place sooner rather than later. The moon lit the marble tomb at the center. She found a blackthorn there with no problem. But she barely put her hand on it when a soft voice called from the vault, "Come and open the tomb for me." Kate began to tremble and was very much afraid. But even as she tried to resist, a force compelled her to unwind the chain that sealed the double doors of the tomb. Descending a short flight of steps, Kate found a casket resting upon a marble table. "Take the lid off, Kate," commanded the voice from the casket. Unable to help herself, Kate did as she was told. Inside there lay the body of a man who had died months before. His eyes were open but unmoving, yet somehow Kate felt them, watching her. His dead lips were drawn slightly apart, and the voice came from between them, though the mouth moved not at all. "Lift me out of here, Kate," the corpse commanded. "Take me on your back." Afraid to refuse, she lifted the body part way up and turned around. Instantly, the corpse threw his arm around her neck and his chest pressed against Kate's back and shoulders. She shook herself, hoping to shake free of the thing. To her horror, she found she could not rid herself of the awful burden. "Carry me there," the dead man whispered in her ear. He stretched his right arm out to point the way, but his left arm remained locked around her neck. Thus guided, Kate carried the corpse out of the churchyard along the stony road. The weight of the dead man grew heavier with each step, but Kate managed to reach the outskirts of town. "Take me to the first house," whispered the dead man. She brought him to the door. "Oh, we cannot go in there," said her burden. "Those people have holy water. Take me to the next house." She went to the next house. "Nah, we cannot go in there either," said he when he stopped in front of the door. "They have holy water as well." He ordered to a third house. Kate groaned when she saw that it was John's house, which he shared with his parents. "Yes, yes," the dead man, "go in here. There's no holy water in this place." Indeed, Kate knew that John and his family were not churchgoers and never kept holy water on hand to bless themselves. Kate tried to hold back, but there's no help for it. She was under the devil's spell, and so they went in. "Carry me to the room above," said he. They went up to the room where John slept, unaware of his night visitors. "Take the cup from beside the bed," said the dead man. "Hold it beneath his wrist." Her hand trembling, Kate did as she had to do. With a fingernail that was like a claw, the dead man pierced the skin at John's wrist, drawing blood. This fell into the cup. When it was nearly full, the dead man touched his finger again to John's wrist. The wound closed. There was no sign of it. But it seemed to Kate that John's life had drained from him with his blood. Before she could say a word, the dead man ordered, "Carry me downstairs, Kate." In the kitchen, the corpse ordered Kate, "Put me in a chair at the table. Fetch oatmeal and mix this blood with it in 2 bowls, one for me, another for you." Kate got 2 bowls and put oatmeal in each, mixed this with blood from the cup, and brought 2 spoons. The dead man began to eat hungrily. Kate pretended to eat, hiding her portion in the napkin on her lap. "Have you eaten your share?"
"Sure, and my plate is empty, as you can see,"
said the young woman boldly. "Come now, take me back to the churchyard."
"Oh, how can I do that? You're too great a load."
She dreaded going back, and she was frantic to know if John still lived. "What you've eaten has made you stronger," said the corpse. "You must take me back to my tomb before sunrise." Again she went against her will. But before she took up her burden, she hid the napkin and the oatmeal behind the cupboard. As she trudged the moonlit road, Kate asked,
What happened to that man whose blood you drew?"
"He shall die before the day is done," said the corpse. "The only cure would be to put 3 bits of that bloody oatmeal in his mouth, but not a speck was left in either bowl, so he'll soon rest near me in the churchyard." Suddenly a cock crowed. "Hurry, hurry," urged the corpse. "I must be in my grave before dawn, and the cock has crowed once."
"Sure, there was just an owl you heard. Whoo!" said Kate. "There's time yet."
With a great effort, she forced herself to walk more slowly. A bit later, another cock crowed. "Haste, haste! I must be in my tomb before the first light of dawn."
"Oh, sure, that was just a dog baying at the moon. Oh!" said Kate.
And she walked more slowly still, though the strain nearly killed her. "Faster!" the corpse ordered, raising his bony hand. "Cut across the field, Dad. It'll bring us to the churchyard sooner." This time she was compelled to obey. As they went across the field, the corpse said, "This land was mine when I lived. Do you see those 3 piles of stones?"
"Indeed I do,"
said Kate. "Underneath of them is a pot of gold. Long I worked to save it, and little good it did me in that life. Oh, now." Kate paused to stare at the heaps of stone. "Don't stop. Dawn is coming," screeched the corpse. "And don't fill your head with thoughts of my gold. When we return, you'll be as dead to the world as I am. The blood you ate is given you to me. You'll sleep at the foot of my coffin by day and take me on my errands by night. Hurry, hurry!" Now, though Kate made a final effort to slow down, they soon found themselves in the churchyard. "Inside with us!" cried the corpse. "I feel the sun rising at my back." The doors of the tomb were still ajar. The blackthorn that had caused Kate's troubles lay on the lintel above. Just as she was about to enter the crypt, she said a prayer and found the strength to grab the walking stick and thrust it through the door handle, stealing the tomb. At this, the corpse began to howl and curse and choke her with his powerful arms. She fought back, but her limbs felt weak as water. Suddenly a cock crowed a third time. With a shriek, the corpse fell away from her, and the gasping girl watched the dead man turn to steaming bones in the morning sunlight. Grabbing the blackthorn, she raced toward the village. There she found John's house in an uproar, his parents having just waked to find him unconscious, nearly dead. Quickly, Kate took the napkin she had hidden. She put 3 bits of the dead man's oatmeal in John's mouth. Instantly he woke and stretched as if he had merely been sleeping. He was astonished to see Kate in the room, with his parents peeping anxiously over her shoulder.
John, do you remember anything of last night?
John said, I recall nothing but falling asleep.
Well and good then,
said Kate. Then she handed him the blackthorn, asking,
Now then, will you keep your promise?
Indeed.
We'll remember before you say the word. Oh, the heck we will, you jerk. You made me go to the graveyard and almost get killed.
Oh, wait, that's not in the story. Wait. Here we go.
Indeed,
he said.
We'll be married before, just as soon as you say the word.
Now, before the wedding, Kate took John to help her dig under the piles of stones in the field near the graveyard. There they found a pot of gold. After they were married, they had a pleasant life. But Kate insisted that John go to church with her each Sunday. And there's always holy water in the house, so they could bless themselves and their children. Well, that's how it would have ended if I wrote it. All right. Oh, I think I've read this one. Oh, Washington Irving. This is a Washington Irving tale. This time we got, oh, what the heck. I didn't want to do ones we've already heard. Let's skip over to The Haunted House from China. The house in the Chinese city of Canton. Is that Canton or Canton? The house in the Chinese city of Canton was old, and it stood empty for more years than anyone could remember. It was so dark and mysterious looking that many strange stories had grown up around it. One well-known tale said that anyone who entered the evil house would never come out again. Now there was a young man, Chao Yen, who was extremely inquisitive and who considered himself very brave. Chao Yen came on a cloudy, moonless night to explore the abandoned house. Carrying a lantern, he stepped through the perfect circle of a moon gate and into the bamboo-choked courtyard beyond. Above the gate were carved characters reading, "The path and the bamboo lead one to the place of mystery." This amused him. The builder of the house had already decided to give it a hint of otherworldliness. No wonder so many stories were told about the place. A path of stepping stones, overgrown with moss and weeds, led to the main entrance of the villa. Sorry, that crashed did other things I needed to fix. Canton is in Michigan, and Georgia. And, yeah, right. Not China, you're saying? Well, in this particular Chinese city of Canton, a path of stepping stones overgrown with moss and weeds led to the main entrance of the villa. A second round doorway framed a panel of rotting wood, and on either side pale walls stretched away into the shadows of a stand of bamboo. The walls were pierced with dark windows, each covered with lacy grillwork. Eager to see what was inside, Chao Yen pushed open the door and swung inward with a groan. The room inside was filled with old-fashioned furniture, which cast weird shadows in the flickering lamplight. Rotting banners and scrolls hung on the walls, but dampness had made what was written on or painted on them impossible to decipher now. Layer upon layer of dust covered everything. Clearly no one had been there for many years. Suddenly Chao Yen stopped. Had he heard something? Of course he did. He listened carefully, but all he could hear was his own breathing. Well, that's a good sign. He moved deeper into the house. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering on the roof tiles. Lightning flashed and thunder roared and rattled the shutters. Now Chao Yen entered a vast drawing room with a huge carved teakwood desk and a chair facing a window of square grillwork. Up on the desk was a scrap of dusty parchment with a fragment of a poem, as though the poet had been abruptly called away. Setting his lantern on the desk and brushing away the worst of the dust, the young man, Chao Yen, read. Daily I wander pleasantly in my garden,
There is a gate, but it is always closed. In my empty rooms I enjoy the leisurely idle hours, shut away from the clamoring beyond the walls. But it is getting dark, and the lovely day is vanishing. Shadows fill my garden, flood my empty rooms. Sighing wind in the bamboo, plashing water in the fountain, carry warnings of his approach. Hark! In the stillness I hear... But there was nothing more. Chow Yen set the parchment down thoughtfully. The words had left him with a queer feeling of suspense, of something about to happen. In the stillness, the writer heard what? Suddenly he began to laugh at himself and his fears. A few shadows and some meaningless words. He was acting like a coward. A rush of wind through the window extinguished the lantern's flame, startling Chow Yen into silence. Then a vivid flash of lightning lit up the window. Beyond the grillwork he saw a huge head, a man's head, on the body of a black dog. The creature was so big it seemed to fill the window from side to side. Darkness, blacker because of thought of the blinding flash, closed in. Chow Yen waited, frozen in place. At first he listened, hearing only the rain. Then he heard the sound of unearthly breathing. Another lightning flash. Now the monstrous thing was inside the room. Chow Yen backed quietly away from the deep, ragged breathing, which marked the creature's whereabouts. At last he found himself pressed flat against the wall. Before he could begin edging toward the door, however, to his horror he felt the wall give way behind him. He tumbled backward in the blackness even deeper than night. There was a final flash of lightning that showed he was in a room littered with skulls and bones. All of them looked as if they had been chewed and splintered by massive jaws. Then the creature pushed through the opening. Chow Yen heard its eager breathing. The secret chamber was filled with the reek of it. A massive paw raked his shoulder. This was too much. The man whom nothing could frighten died of fear. The end. I don't know. Having been mostly earthbound and mostly breathing, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. All right, then. So back to England from China. Isn't there a Canton in England, too? Yeah. In a little English country church, there's a stone inscribed, "In the memory of the beloved bride and mistress of the family, honor, and estates, who was taken away by a sudden untimely fate at the very time of her marriage celebration." And this, my friends, is the story behind that sad inscription. Many years ago, a young woman, Alice, the daughter of a country parson, fell in love with Owen, the young lord of the nearby manor. Owen had come into his inheritance early, when his parents had died, and the young man was just as much in love with Alice. The handsome couple were often seen strolling hand in hand across the meadow or riding side by side along the forest path. I should have paused in between the stories to point out, yes, we're running to 8 o'clock, and then we'll pause, and 9 o'clock we'll come back with a late night terror story. So I hope you're enjoying. You can stay with us, and if not, come back at 9. Now Owen and Alice had exchanged rings, upon which were engraved the words, "I will never be far from you, my love. Be never far from me," above their intertwined initials. Oh, how sweet. Alice and Owen were equally fond of games. On the day of their wedding, they planned an afternoon of diversions. The bride, still in her gown of white lace, led her groom and their guests through all sorts of amusements: charades, cribbage, casino, and whist. Finally, Alice announced that the last game of the day would be hide and seek. Oh, I just got a chilled feeling this is not going to end up well. Ah, well. Now, one group, including the bride herself, would hide. It would be up to the groom and the rest to find them. When all those in hiding were located, the bride cake would be served, and the evening would be left to the young couple, who would depart to a honeymoon tour of Europe the next morning. Now, while the seekers counted to 100, the hiders scattered along the corridors and up the staircases through all the chambers of the groom's vast mansion. Alice, who knew the manor as well as she knew their father's house, went directly to the hidey hole she had chosen long before. No one was around when she settled into her secret place. Oh, yes, this just forebodes, doesn't it? With a laugh, Alice thought how hard they would have to search to find her. In fact, she was sure she would be the last one found, and so would win the game. She was still laughing when something dealt her a blow in the head, knocking her senseless. Then there was a faint click, and then unending darkness. Throughout the manor, the merriment of the seekers was matched by the laughter of those who were found. But as the late afternoon shadows melted into evening, Owen began to grow uneasy. Everyone had been found but Alice. Because she knew every corner and cupboard in the manor, he was at first not too worried. But as time went on and the guests became concerned, he announced the game was over. Loudly calling Alice's name, the wedding party looked high and low. They searched the kitchens, peering into pantries filled with dishes and pots. They investigated each bedroom, looking under every bed, behind the curtains. The ballroom was searched, the dining hall, the library, the cloakroom. They shouted to Alice in the shadowed attic, where rows of dusty boxes and chests looked as if they had been undisturbed for 100 years. They explored the cellar, filled with bric-a-brac that Lord Owen's ancestors had stored and forgotten. But Alice was nowhere to be found. When the house had been combed top to bottom, Owen had his guests and servants widen the search to include the gardens, outbuildings, and nearby woods. With candles and torches and lanterns, they traced and retraced their steps, but they found no clue to Alice's whereabouts. Where could she be? Poor Owen felt his heart would break. Alice's father, the parson, was just as bewildered. Long after the other guests had left, he and Owen continued to search the manor from attic to cellar, calling Alice's name. But she did not answer. Alice had vanished. Rumors flew. Alice had run off with someone else, fearful of wifehood. She had entered a convent. She had been abducted by poachers when she hid in the woods. The only fact was, Alice was never seen again. Owen never remarried. From time to time, the parson would visit, only to find Owen holding the ring Alice had given him, his lips moving silently as he read the inscription. I will never be far from you, my love. Be never far from me. Then he would run his fingers over their intertwined initials. In time, the parson departed this earth. Then Owen had no visitors. His loyal servants, whom he barely noticed, kept the manor from falling into ruin. From dawn to dusk he wandered his estate, driven to the edge of madness, wondering what had become of his one true love, Alice. And when he had grown old, he found himself in the attic one rainy day. The attic had become a refuge where he could be alone in his memories. He sat beside a small window, watching rain run in sheets down the dusty glass. If only I knew that your love was true, sweet Alice, Owen whispered, then I could die happy. These days he felt that death was another resident of the manor, the one who kept out of sight for the time being. He wiped away a tear. Then something caught his eye. A tiny triangle of white lace, no bigger than a fingernail, caught between the lid and the side of the trunk, half hidden by several others. Like a man in a dream, he went over to the trunk. It was closed. The latch was hooked over the swivel eye, sealing it. With trembling hands, the old man unfastened the latch and raised the lid. Aye, there lay the mortal remains of Alice, and nothing more than a skeleton with yellowing bones, the color of rotting lace of her wedding gown. The trunk had been her tomb from the awful afternoon when its lid had fallen upon her head, knocking her out, or the latch had dropped into a locked position. In the dim attic light, her lover read aloud the first time the words that were engraved in his heart as well as on the ring still encircling her finger bone. I will never be far from you, my love. Be never far from me. We have never been far apart, my Alice, he murmured, nor will we ever be. So saying, he reached down, clasped her lifeless form to his chest, and died in her withered arms. And nobody got any cake. Well then, poor Alice. Go ask Alice when she's locked in a trunk. The moral of the story is don't climb into refrigerators or trunks in the attic. So,
The next one is The Rose Elf from Hans Christian Andersen, which is a grand story, but I'm trying to go with ones we may not have heard before. Though, I don't know. Let's do it. So, anybody heard of the Rose Elf from Denmark? In the midst of a garden grew a rose tree, and in the prettiest of all the roses lived a tiny elf. He was as well formed as a child and had wings that reached from his shoulders to his feet. Each day he enjoyed the warm sunshine, flying from flower to flower and keeping company with the butterflies. Now humans rarely came to that corner of the garden, but one day as he lay napping in the warm heart of his rose, the elf overheard two people talking. Peeping out between the blood-red petals, he saw a handsome young man and a beautiful lady sitting side by side on the bench shaded by his rosy tree. From the way they held hands and gazed into each other's eyes, the elf could see they loved each other deeply. "We must part for a time, my dear, alas," the man said. "Your brother does not like our engagement. He plans to send me far away on business." "Oh, but it breaks my heart to think of you gone for so long," said the young woman. "Don't be sad," her lover said. "This adventure promises rich rewards. When I return, I will bring enough for us to marry, whether your brother gives his blessing or not." They kissed, and the girl wept. Then she picked the very rose that held the elf. She kissed it and pinned it to her lover's breast. She left then, whispering, "Farewell, Anthony, my love." In the rose, the tiny elf could hear Anthony's heart beating as the man walked through a grove of trees. But suddenly another man blocked the path. The stranger's look was dark and threatening. The elf at once guessed this was the brother of the beautiful woman. Without warning, the newcomer drew out a dagger and stabbed Anthony. The murderer then cut off his victim's head and buried it beside the body in the soft earth under a linden tree. There he also hid the fatal dagger. "You are gone, and will soon be forgotten," said the evildoer. "When my sister asks why you failed to return, I will tell her that young men are fickle and not to be trusted." He scattered dry leaves over the disturbed earth with his foot, then left. But he was not alone. No, the little elf accompanied him, sitting in a dry, rolled-up linden leaf which had fallen on the man's hat as he dug the grave. The little elf shuddered with grief and anger at what he had seen. When the evil man reached home, he took off his hat and went to see his sister, but found her asleep in her room. She stirred without waking and murmured, "Oh, sweet Anthony." At this, her brother shook his hat at her sleeping form as though to drive away her happy dreams. He did not notice the dry leaf falling from his hat onto the counterpane. When he had gone, the elf slipped out of the leaf, placed himself at the woman's sleeping ear, and told her of the horrid murder. He described how her brother had buried Anthony beneath the linden tree. "So that you will not think this is merely a dream," the little elf said. "When you awake, you will find on your bed a withered leaf." Soon she stirred and found the leaf. Fearful, but determined to know the truth of her dream, she went to the linden tree. Brushing away the leaves and loose earth beneath the tree, she found her love and cried terribly. The elf was a witness to her grief, for he had hidden and written on a curl of her hair. After weeping a long time, she took up Anthony's head. "Ew," kissed his cold lips. "Ew," and shook the earth from his hair. "I will keep you near me always. Ew," she said. She covered the body again with the earth and leaves, but she took the head. Ew. The rose she had pinned to her lover's coat, and the dagger. In her room, she took a large flower pot and placed in it the head, ew, and the dagger. She covered these with earth and planted the rose in it. Ew. This was all she could do, for she could not bring herself to hand her brother over to the hangman. The elf settled himself in the rose, and using his magic, he made the rose grow into a bush of blood-red blossoms. This gave some comfort to the young woman, who every day watered the wonderful plant with her tears. At first her brother could not imagine why she wept over a flower pot. When he came to understand that she was grieving for Anthony, he grew angry and cold. When he realized that she had nothing but loathing for him, he went out of his way to avoid her. Day after day, the girl would lean her head against the flower pot, imagining she heard Anthony's gentle voice whispering to her. Sometimes she dozed, and the rose elf at her ear talked of sweet things and gave her restful dreams. As she lived more in dreams and memories, her life faded.
One day, her spirit joined her brothers in heaven. When her brother discovered her lifeless body beside the flower pot, he ordered his servants to arrange for her funeral. He would have no part in it. Then, because he fancied the splendid rose bush for himself, he lifted it to take it to his room. But the rose elf took a tiny sharp thorn and stung the man in the hand, so he dropped the flower pot. It shattered, and those who had come to prepare the dead girl for burial saw the whitened skull. Then they realized that the brother was a murderer. His own dagger lay beside it. The evildoer was sentenced to hang, and no one suspected that within the heart of the rosebush, which they planted on the young lovers' graves, there dwelled one who had punished a terrible crime. Ah, good little elf. Yeah, I didn't know that one either, Sin. Which is not too surprising, I guess. Hans Christian Andersen has lots and lots and lots of stories, and though I've read lots of stories, he's got 3 more lots of than I have read lots. Yeah. Okay. So our next one is, follow up to that one. The Skull That Spoke. Now see, that would have been helpful in the last story if the skull could speak. Nigeria. These are sometimes interesting. There was a clever young man, Kigbo, who was also lazy. He did not want to fish or hunt or grow yams. His words were honey sweet, so he was always able to charm some food from his neighbors. But though Kigbo was unwilling to work, he was greedy. He dreamed of becoming a rich man so he could purchase cattle and wives, spend his days growing fat and contented, and always be respected by his tribe. One day as Kigbo walked along a forest path, lost in dreams of gaining effortless wealth, he stumbled over a skull, half buried in the soft earth. Annoyed, he struck at the skull with his staff, saying, "You foolish thing, get out of my way." A second blow of his staff sent the skull rolling across the clearing. To his amazement, Kigbo heard the skull say, "Why do you treat me so? Why do you call me foolish?" Though he was very much afraid, the young man said boldly, "You lie here, forgotten, not buried by family or friends. Therefore you must have been a person of no importance, and to have died poor without wives and friends to bury your bones means you were foolish also." "And you," said the skull, "have you so many wives? Have you so much importance in your village?" And it seemed to Kigbo that the fleshless thing was mocking him. "Oh," said Kigbo, "I am very clever. I will soon get for myself all the things I do not yet have. I will not die of foolishness like you." "If I died of foolishness," said the skull, "then you will soon die of your cleverness." "Enough!" cried Kigbo, and he walked away. But as he walked, the young man began to get an idea of how to turn his chance meeting with the talking skull into his advantage. Upon reaching his village, he went to the royal house and prostrated himself before the king. The king demanded, "Why have you come before me?" Kigbo answered, "I found a skull that spoke to me. Surely such a wonder is a gift from the gods, a marvel worthy of a king." At first the king's wives and his counselors and his bodyguards laughed at Kigbo. But the king looked at the young man darkly and said, "Have you told this story in the hope that I would believe it, and therefore seem foolish in your eyes?" For the king was very much concerned with his own importance. To mock him was a treason of the worst sort and punishable by death. But Kigbo said, "Upon my life, I promise you that I am speaking the truth." "Why then bring this skull, this gift of the gods, and set it before me," said the king. "If it says but one word, I will give you cowries enough to buy cattle and wives and heaps of yams. But if it fails to speak, I will have your head." Filled with thoughts of all the riches that would soon be his, Kigbo retraced his steps into the forest. Soon he found the skull and picked it up. "Have a care, Kigbo," the skull said. "If I died of my foolishness, then you will soon die of your cleverness." Ignoring this warning, the young man hurried back to the royal house. There he prostrated himself and set the skull at the king's feet. "Speak," Kigbo commanded. The skull spoke not a word. Depending on when you grew up and where you grew up and what you watched when you were a child, somehow the Michigan Rag song comes to my mind right now. Anyway, the skull spoke not a word. "Speak, you foolish thing," cried Kigbo. Not a word came from the fleshless jaws. Then Kigbo beat the skull with the end of his staff, and this had no better effect than his words.
The king, angry that Kigbo was playing such a trick on him, made a sign to one of his bodyguards. Unmindful of this, Kigbo had picked up the skull and was shaking it. The bodyguard's axe sliced through the air. Kigbo's head toppled from his lifeless body. With another movement of his hand, the king signed to the servants to throw the young man's body and head, as well as the skull, into the jungle. Head and skull rolled to a stop, facing each other in the forest shade. "You foolish thing!" Kigbo yelled at the skull. "Look what you have done to me!" But the skull only grinned and said, "It was only your own cleverness, Kigbo, that brought you here. For being too clever can be as fatal as being too foolish." I'm a baby, the Michigan rag. Anyway, see, there was this, that's the one. See, Mags knows. Stupid frog. Oh, we have time. Ireland again. The monster of Balak. Now, there's a curious legend that Ireland will never face the fire and brimstone of the last day. Rather, the story goes, on the day before all other nations are delivered over the destroying flame, Ireland will be devoured by a giant born of her own people. The legend goes on to say that the devouring giant has already been born and is in hiding, waiting, and longing for the day before the last day, when he can gulp and swallow the whole country that has been hiding him alive since ancient times. And this is the story of how that monster came to be. Exactly, Mags. In times past, most people dwelt in Ireland's valleys and plains. Only a few lived in the mountains, where they had to fight for their living against wild beasts and against the ferns and bushes that were forever invading and choking their fields. Now it happened that a man and his wife lived in a little rough and tumble hut high up on the side of Knockbill Downs. Now for years they longed for a child, but none was given them. So they went on working themselves in that lonely place where they only saw the occasional hunter or wood-gatherer. At last the woman had a son, and husband and wife rejoiced mightily on the day he was born. But a few days later the woman left the baby snug in his cradle while she went out to milk the cow. Her husband had gone to gather wood for the fire. When she returned with a jug of milk, the woman thought that the baby looked different. Leaning closer, she saw that he was growing. In a short time he was too big to stay in the cradle, and so he climbed out onto the floor. And then he took an oat cake which was lying on the hearth and swallowed it in one gulp, and never mind, it was nearly hot as a coal. Not a sound did the baby make, but only looked around the place for more to eat. The woman had never heard the story of the giant who would devour the land before the last day, but she could see that something was greatly amiss. Growing again, the child snatched up a jug of milk and downed it as though it were a thimbleful. After this, he caught hold of everything within reach he could eat. All the while he was growing bigger and bigger. Soon the crown of his head touched the roof of the cottage. He grew again, and the rafters creaked. Quick as a wink, the monster child grabbed the cat hiding in the corner and swallowed it down. Uh-oh, I wonder if Kira's still awake. When he looked angrily at the woman, she fled from the house with a shriek. Now, at most times, there would have been no one to witness her distress. But this day it happened an old man was passing by, and he was a wizard, and it was rumoured that he could look into the future as well as cast powerful spells. When he saw the woman racing down the path in fright, he called to her, "What's the matter to you?" Before she could answer, the giant child stood up on legs as thick as tree trunks and tossed the roof of the hut aside as easily as a waking man throws off a blanket. And then he killed and gobbled up 2 bullocks in the pen beside the dwelling. "Sure, that must be the giant who will swallow Ireland before the last day," the wizard cried. "But the way he's growing, he'll bring ruin upon us all before the appointed time." "Well, can you do something to make him as he was?" asked the frantic woman. "Oh, that's not in my power. I cannot prevent what he was created to do. I can only keep him from doing it too soon." The woman, caught between the love of her child that had been and the fear of the monster that had come to be, began to weep and moan. But the old man started to say spells and incantations and all of that sort, and to make charms and symbols from bits of twigs and grass that he pulled up from the ground. And each time the giant, who was still growing, tried to seize the magician and the sobbing woman, the charms turned him away. 3 times the giant tried to snatch up his hands as big as hayricks, his eyes blazing with the hunger. 3 times the spells kept him at bay, as if he had come up against an unseen wall. At last the monstrous creature turned away and began to climb the steep path up the mountainside behind the ruined cottage. The wizard pursued him, still muttering secret words. All the while the huge figure kept growing and bigger and more terrifying. He was treading with heavy steps now because the spells were upon him, but he was raging to devour the world. The fury in him made him awful to behold. The pounding of his heart against his ribs shook the mountains. His hair bristled thick and stiff and sharp as spearheads. He roared like 100 lions, so great was the anger in him. Still, he thundered up the path, with the wizard following, and the old woman coming also, for she must see how things came out. Soon the giant reached the mountain lake of Blaylock, and as the three of them straggled toward the shore, the wind began to rise and black clouds gathered over the hills. And amazingly, the cap that he had swallowed earlier wandered by, alive and unhurt. So it must have been a mistake, and he didn't really swallow him after all. However, when the monster planted his massive feet on the lake shore, a wild blast of wind shrieked through the hills. A frightful, voracious vulture arose from the rocks and flew screaming over the water. The witches and goblins of the mountains rose up from cave and crevice. The destroying demons and ghosts of all who had died near that place filled the air. All were drawn by the wizard's magic to harry the monster. Hidden behind a rock, the old woman watched wide-eyed as the wizard summoned a great, howling whirlwind down from the mountain peaks. This caught the giant and carried him out to the middle of the lake, and there dropped him. In spite of his thrashing about, the giant soon began to sink, because unlike bumbles, giants do not bounce. And as he sank, the wind died away and the water became calm. Bird and banshee, ghost and goblin fled back into hiding. The silence of death hung over Blaylock.
"Oh,"
wept the woman.
"though he was a monster, he was once my babe. Now he's drowned and lost, never to return."
But the wizard said grimly, "Aye, the like of him is never drowned. But with the spells that are on him, he's chained to his feet. He must bide his time at the bottom of Blaylock until his bonds are loosened on the day before Judgment Day." And ever after this, shepherds would say that once a year a whirlwind would blow through the peaks of Knockmill Downs, and in the sound of it could be heard demons and ghosts screeching away. The surface of the lake would churn, and then a thunderous voice would rise from the depths of the lake, asking, "Is it the day before the last day yet?" When there was no answer, the voice would be stilled. Then for another year, Ireland would be safe from the giant, who was destined to devour the land on the day before the destruction of the world. The giant of Blaylock. Well, me dearies, I think we got time for one more. Yep, for one more. It will be either the new mother from England or Rokuro Kubi from Japan. Let's try Japan, and if we have time, we'll jump back and do the England one. And then 9 o'clock, late night terror. Ooh, wow, there's another good one there. Say, Rokuro Kubi. More than 500 years ago, there was a samurai named Quiro, who gave up the life of a warrior and put on the robes of a priest. But he kept alive within himself the heart of a samurai, a scorned danger. Those were lawless times, my friend, when a lone traveler was always in peril, even if he was a priest. But Quiro would go anywhere to preach the holy teachings of Buddha. One evening, while Quiro was crossing the mountain of a remote province, darkness overtook him when he was still far away from the village. He had resigned himself to sleeping under the stars that night when a man came along the road carrying an axe and a bundle of chopped wood. "Good evening, sir," said the woodcutter, bowing to Quiro. "I am surprised to see a stranger on this road so late. Are you not afraid of things that haunt the dark?" "Aye, my friend," Quiro responded cheerfully. "I am only a poor wandering priest, but I am not the least afraid of goblins, and I find lonesome places ideal for meditation." "Oh, then, you must be a brave man indeed," the peasant responded. "But I can assure you this is a very dangerous region.
Although my house is only a wretched hut, I beg you to come home with me at once. Alas, I have no food to offer you, but there is at least a roof to shelter you. Quiro gratefully accepted this modest offer. So the woodcutter guided him away from the main road and up the narrow path through a mountain forest. After a long time, the priest found himself upon a cleared space at the top of a hill, with the moon shining overhead. Before him was a thatched cottage with paper lanterns glowing in each window. First, the woodcutter showed Quiro a shed behind the house. Here, bamboo pipes brought water from a nearby stream, so the men washed their feet. This done, they entered the cottage. Inside, Quiro found 2 men and 2 women warming their hands at the fire pit in the center of the room. All bowed to the priest and greeted him respectfully. There followed some polite conversation, and then the woodcutter showed Quiro a little side room where a sleeping mat and a pillow awaited him. Promising to pray for them to repay their hospitality, the priest retired. The household settled into sleep, but Quiro read the Holy Sutras by the light of a paper lantern. As the hour grew late, he became thirsty. Remembering the clear running water in the shed, he decided to go and get a drink. To avoid disturbing the household, he gently pushed apart the sliding screens separating his room from the main chamber. By the light of his lantern, he saw 5 bodies upon sleeping mats, all headless. At first, he thought his host had been murdered, but a closer look showed no traces of violence or blood. Then he realized that this was a house of some Rokurokubi, a demonic creature whose heads left their bodies to hunt food. He guessed that the heads had made their exit through the open smoke over the roof. He knew he was in great danger, since the creatures would devour any living thing, even a man. Hearing no sound, Quiro unbarred the main door. He knew that moving the bodies would confuse and distract the creatures, so he dragged them out and hid them in the bamboo thicket. Then he returned, and he hurried toward the stand of cedars at the head of the path. But when he entered the grove, he heard voices. Peering out from behind a tree trunk, he saw the heads bobbing and darting. They're eating worms and insects they found on the ground or in the trees. "How fat that priest is!" cried the woodcutter. Said, "How good he will taste! Though we cannot touch him when he is praying, he may have fallen asleep by now. Someone go and see." The head of a young woman rose up and flitted like a bat-like toward the cottage. After a few minutes, she flew back, crying, "The priest is not there. He has hidden our bodies." "We must find them," said the woodcutter, "or we will die. When I see that priest, I will kill him. I will tear him. I will devour him." Suddenly the creature's eyes went wide, and he shouted to the others, "There he is, hiding behind a tree." Shrieking, the 5 disembodied heads flew at Quiro. But he had armed himself with a stout tree branch, and he struck the heads as they came at him. With tremendous blows, he knocked them aside. But the buffeting only seemed to anger them. They came for him again and again, their eyes burning, their sharp teeth clackety-clacking, though he wielded the branches skillfully as he had once used a sword, or as Scott Erickson wielded a baseball bat. The 5 heads were too much for him. 2 of the heads clamped their jaws on the branch and gnawed it to pieces. With snapping jaws, the 3 other heads dived at him. He chopped at them with the sides of his hands, but each bit off a mouthful of his flesh. Desperate to find shelter from the snapping teeth, Quiro ran back toward the house, slapping and punching at his tormentors. At the entrance, he swung around and punched the woodcutter in the face. "Woof there!" slamming the head into one immediately behind him. Then he ducked inside the hut, pushing the door shut and barring it. He yanked on the cord that shut the smoke hole, but a moment later he heard screaming heads, chewing at the oiled paper that covered the windows. Quiro looked around for a weapon, but could see nothing. In an alcove he found piles of clothes, coins, and jewelry that Rokurokubi had taken from their victims. There was even a suit of armor and a sword. So Quiro snatched up the sword as ripping sounds followed by screeches warned him that the heads had chewed through the window coverings. To their dismay, they found the priest had once again become a samurai. As the frenzied creatures flew at him, Quiro's sword cut them to ribbons. At last, only the woodcutter's head was left. He had skillfully eluded the sword blade, managed to chew off several gobbets of Quiro's flesh. Though he was in terrible pain, Quiro stood his ground. When the howling Rokurokubi rushed at his face, he waited until the last possible moment. Then his sword flashed. The upper half of the creature's head, its eyes filled with rage, struck the wall. The teeth from the lower half clamped onto the sleeve of Quiro's robe, biting as if the clothes were skin. Instantly, Quiro cut away the sleeve and wrapped the snarling, snapping half-head in it
and tied the bundle tight. When he had locked it in a wooden chest, he set fire to the cottage, determined that no evil would remain to harm unworried travelers. The priest said a prayer that he hoped would bring the spirits of the Rokuro Kubi eternal rest. Wow, that was kind of fun. Usually found the Japanese ghost tales to be a lot of fun. Sometimes they run into ritual stuff that it never really gets anywhere, but most of the time they're really creative, inventive, fun tales, I think. And so, my friends, we are halfway to Halloween. We'll stick around for the sealed book. The sealed book at 9 p.m. right here in the Kailora Glen, the Shawnee Library in Second Life, and right here in the Haunted Forest in Octoberworld in Kitely.